Greetings and welcome to this episode of Go XDGO, the official podcast of XDGO. XDGO is an action-oriented design leadership consultancy that focuses on helping organizations, teams, and individuals understand, embrace, and sustain the practice of human-centered experience design. I'm Matthew Doty, founder and principal consultant of XDGO. This episode continues a series of episodes focused on design leadership. In this series, I interview both leaders of design capabilities and teams, as well as other leaders who value good design. My goal is to explore what it means to be responsible for teams who design great experiences, as well as what it takes to organize and enable the practice of experience design from a leadership perspective. In this episode, I spend some time with Sarah Timmings, Vice President of Strategy and Creative at C-Space. For those of you listening to this podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, make sure to check out this podcast on our YouTube channel so you can see our smiling faces as we discuss, learn, and laugh together. A link to our YouTube channel is included in the description of this podcast. So again, huge thank you for spending time with me. I know that I really enjoy talking with you. And as I got this idea to do like several episodes in a row about design leadership, I was like, ooh, who can I talk to? And I was like, oh, I should talk to Sarah. That's how everybody, and anybody who might be watching this on YouTube, can see my excitement. What I kind of like where I'd like to start is, I'd love to know, and I'm sure anybody who, some of my few listeners who actually, follow this podcast.
I'm sure growing listeners.
Hopefully, would like to know is just a quick, brief history on your background and kind of where you landed, where you are today, and a little bit about what you do.
Yes. So in school, I studied advertising, and I actually started out on the creative track thinking that I was going to be an art director. So I spent a lot of time in classes around, just the design process, design thinking, and visualizing ideas. I sort of pretty quickly learned that from a purely artistic perspective, maybe I wasn't the most talented in the bunch.
Okay.
And that actually kind of led me to pivot, because I was realizing that what was really drawing me to that side of the house in the advertising world anyway, was the creative process. And you can use the creative process in so many ways. It doesn't have to actually translate to sketching out a storyboard, which was not my strong suit. So I still thinking about, where my career would go through the lens of the ad world. I pivoted into planning, which was really about, deep understanding of the customer and how to connect insight to some type of marketing message.
Right.
So that was my first. So my first few jobs were in the account planning space in the ad world. And then I pretty quickly found out about the company that I currently work at, C-Space, which it was a deeper dive into that world of planning. What I was coming up against in my job was that oftentimes it felt like the advertising agency was so far down the funnel. We were getting briefs after the product had been created, and then we figured out who the product was for, or vice versa, depending on how you're doing things.
Right.
The brief was just coming to us so far down the road. Everything was baked, and it felt like it was just a superficial way, at least for what I wanted to do, to connect sort of a real need to a solution. So that's when I joined C-Space, and I have had several roles there, always in one way or another trying to kind of create the future of the company. So that started out with this group they had that was deep into storytelling and really bringing an insight to life in a way that people can feel. And then from there, I moved into the innovation space, which really got back to my sort of roots and what initially attracted me into design thinking. And now, for the past couple of years, I've been on the strategy and experience team, which is really where I think to your questions about design and design leadership, where I've been really able to sort of play the most, which has been great. And I've been leading that team for almost a year now.
So obviously you weren't, when you were, little Sarah Timmings,
I still
weren't
feel like little Sarah Timmings.
right. I'm sure you weren't sitting there in elementary school drawing in crayon, I want to be the director of innovation and strategy.
Yeah, I probably didn't know what that was.
Strategy and experience. So like, and you did kind of walk us through like how you got there. But it seems like as you were talking, like there just kind of seems to be this central theme that I think you identified, which is you really like the creative process, and I'd love to dig into that just a little bit more. So in your mind, like what are kind of like the key tenets of that process, and I agree with you, like it's this universally applicable thing, but like what are some examples of like when you've been able to apply that to maybe some unique problems?
Yeah, I think well, one of the biggest parts of it for me is this principle of everyone can be creative. That's something I always say, we always say at the company. And I actually think it's really powerful because so many people, I would say most people will tell you, oh, I'm not creative. And
Right.
I think it's such a cop-out. And I actually think it's a pretty dangerous way to think because it puts you, I mean, it's the opposite of having a growth mindset,
Right.
which we all know is so important. But it also just sort of like sets up an attitude of being resigned to like, it is what it is. And the only way to make any type of change, however small it might be, is to think about how can we do something a little bit differently. So this principle of everyone can be creative is actually really central to a lot of the work that I do on my team. We oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes we use co-creation in our projects, which is bringing different stakeholders together to come up with ideas together. The idea that sort of 1 + 1 = 3. So when we get those diverse perspectives in the room, we're able to come up with something much better than we would have on our own. So I guess actually I would say collaboration, that's another principle that is important. But we do spend a lot of time and have a lot of actual activities we go through with people in those live sessions, or what we've been doing more and more, virtual sessions, to help people own their creativity and sort of just gain a little bit more confidence there. So, so that can be something as simple as one of the workshop games that we would use is an activity called Create a Game That's Never Been Played, where you get in a small group, however many people are in the room, you break them down into a few groups, and you say you have 3 minutes, you need to create a game that's never been played. It needs to be able to have a winner and a loser, and you need to be able to demonstrate it to the rest of the room. Then everybody, spends their 3 minutes frantically trying to figure out what this is. There's lots of different tactics I've seen people use. Sometimes people are trying to look around to see like the physical objects in the room that they can incorporate some way. Sometimes people are trying to model it off something they know. But ultimately, however silly and crazy the ideas end up being, everyone is able to come up with something, which is really the point. Is it's not, we're not expecting brilliance every time. It's really sort of a quantity over quality situation. We're just trying to get that muscle, some exercise, I guess, of thinking differently. How can we try to solve this problem?
Right. No, I love that. I really, I'm going to use that sometime if that's okay with you, just as long as I give all the appropriate like credits to,
and I can't take credit for coming up with it. So
awesome. So that, it's really interesting I think the thing that resonated with me most out of everything that you were saying is this notion of trying to encourage this culture of everybody is creative, and kind of the flip of that. I don't think it's overly dramatic to say that it's dangerous to think otherwise, like that kind of cop out or dangerous thinking of, oh, I'm not creative, is really interesting. And I think when I think about kind of principles of design leadership, that for me, at least in my experience, is an attitude that I've seen my favorite creative leaders have. That there's this idea that not all ideas come from people who have creative in their title or design in their title, and I think it's on those people specifically to make sure that everybody not just verbally knows that, but like sees it in action and feels it. So kind of a segue, to use that as a segue. What would you say, like when you think about leading design or design leadership, what would you say are how would you define that, or and then what are some of the core things that must be true in order to be effective?
That's a really good question. And, immediately it makes me think of two different things. So I
Mhm.
have my team who are actually made up of also, I guess you could say similar to myself, but quite a wide array of different skill sets. Like we're not all designers on the team,
Right.
in a sense that we went to design school.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
there's a lot of different skill sets on my team, and there's managing and leading them. But then there's also, I don't think I explained this earlier, but my team is sort of a separate unit within the larger company. And part of what our role is to also spread the type of work and thinking that we do throughout the rest of the company. So I would say
Ooh,
that's an even separate and different type
yeah,
of design leadership.
yeah,
Um,
nice.
and that's probably more where I think the people on my team have sort of already in some ways self-selected into, whether or not I am a designer, I have a creative mindset and I will approach problems in different
Right,
ways until I figure out how to solve it.
right, right.
um, so I think leading them is really about making space.
Hmm.
We talked about collaboration earlier, and I've found that the work is so infinitely better when you make the space for that collaborative time.
Mm.
You can have the smartest person on my team working against a problem or a specific project on their own, and it will take a long time and it will come out well, but it
Hmm.
is ultimately so much more efficient and leads to such better outcomes when we're working together. And it's really just about diversity of
Yeah.
perspective,
Hmm.
getting more lenses onto the specific problem we're trying to solve is always
Right.
a good thing. So I think making space for collaboration is really important with my team. The
Hmm.
other thing I've noticed is, and this is a bit of just this is probably true of managing any team, but different personalities and skills that go really well together, and
Hmm.
trying to purposefully build those teams and make those connections happen. Um, everyone's a different type, right? And you want to make
Right,
sure that you're
right.
getting the different types in the right sort of
Hmm.
mixture to make the right outcome. So
Yeah.
that's something that I think we always try to do, and is never ultimately that easy because everyone's working on a million things and you can't always build the exact right team that you want. But that's, I think,
Right.
important to strive for as well. And then, like I was saying, so that's my team. I think then there's also the rest of the business, which is, we've been, our team's been around for a couple of years now, and more
Hmm.
has been getting experience with the type of project that typically would only live in my team, have more and more been living
Hmm.
in the rest of the business. So I think that's where things like, um, some of those activities I was sharing earlier around like create a game that's never been played, or another one is, there's some other ideation games like this is not a
Hmm.
spoon, where you'll have to say something that this is other than what a spoon. You hold it up and you're like, this isn't a spoon, it's a back scratcher or a swimming pool for
Right.
ants or something. um, I think some of those ideation type activities are helpful,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
that also it also I feel like experience is also really important, and what we've been trying
Mm.
to do more and more is give people an actual on the job experience working with
Right.
someone from my team on a specific type of strategy or experience design project. Because
Yeah.
getting back to that, like everyone can be creative, I firmly believe that. And I don't think that anything that my team is doing exclusively my team can do. I think like anyone, if they try to go through the right steps and engage the
Yeah.
right collaborators, can solve these problems. So I
Right.
think it's just about like, you need a chance to do that and a little bit of
Hmm.
guidance and support. And then, from there, it's like, you've done it once, you're going to probably do it differently every other time, but at least
Right.
you've done it once.
Right. Yeah. Oh, there's quite a bit that I would love to unpack there. So here's where I'd like to start. So something that I think you mentioned in the very very beginning, and I think it was just uh, in passing, you said leading and managing a team. I would love to know from your perspective. I mean, I have my own opinions about this, but I would love to know from your perspective. What is the difference?
Oh, that's
Or
a good
well,
question.
is there a difference?
Mhm.
And if so, what is the difference?
I think there's definitely a difference. And my perspective on it is that, well, at least when I say managing, what I'm thinking about is the pieces of it that are, um, the resourcing and the ops piece of it, and
Hmm.
financial tracking, and making sure we're meeting our
Hmm.
numbers, and
Hmm.
that, which I don't mean to say in a way where I don't think that's important. It's obviously very important, but
Sure,
I think
it's
you
just
can,
different.
right, it's just
Yeah.
different. And I think
Hmm.
it is honestly hard to do both of those things, because then I think on the
Hmm.
leadership side of things, um, to me, or this is just the type of leader I am. There are many different types of leaders that are
Hmm.
all have their own strengths.
Hmm.
I would put myself in the category of um, trying to lead by making space for others to shine.
Hmm.
I think some leaders are. Um, I feel like there's this charismatic leader who's like the visionary
Hmm.
thinker. I don't necessarily put myself in that category.
Okay.
I think that's a really strong and important role.
Hmm.
But I think when I think about my strengths, it's about like enabling others to succeed,
Yeah.
making a path for them, putting the spotlight on them when they have succeeded. I really want
Hmm.
everyone on my team to feel like they're contributing to the future of the business, and
Hmm.
really building the future of the business. And as part of that, I want them to
Hmm.
know that everything they're working on is not only important, but
Hmm.
like that they're getting some of the spotlight for the work that they're doing.
Yeah.
Um, so I just really want everyone to feel valued, and like the work that they're doing really matters. Um,
Yeah.
and then I also think, you know, leading a team of high performers is also really hard. You might think like, oh, it's harder to deal with the people that have performance issues, and I'm sure that's hard too. But
Hmm.
high performers are hard to keep engaged. I find
Yeah.
they do a certain type of work one or two times, and then they're like, okay, bored, let's do something different.
Right. Right.
um, and they're all just such smart, amazing people who have so many different interests and passions that it's oftentimes can feel like, if I'm not actively steering in terms of where I want the focus and the direction to go, that
Hmm.
we would be going in a million different directions.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's so awesome to hear. I want to follow up because I think my leadership style is actually very similar to yours. I find the greatest joy in creating space for people to thrive, and when they shine, when they do something that's amazing, spotlight on them, spotlight on them, spotlight on them. So it actually makes me wonder. So on the Myers Briggs, I lead with introversion, and I can't help but wonder if that's part of why that's my style. Are you also I on the Myers
I'm
Briggs, or are
trying to
you or
remember.
are you extroverted?
I have a really hard time with the Myers-Briggs, because I I've taken it a few times over the years, and I feel like I've gotten very different responses each time. And
Right, and isn't that like not supposed to be the way it goes, or something like
I
that?
think it's because, like, as a researcher, um, I get too in my head. Sometimes I wonder if researchers
Yeah,
are actually the best participants or maybe the worst participants.
the worst. Yeah,
Because on one
right,
hand, I feel like when someone asks us a research question, I am like, oh, well, I know what you're trying to solve. So I'm going to give you
right.
all of this information that's going to be really helpful. And then on the other hand, I also think like I really overthink what they're asking. And Myers-Briggs, I think, is an example of that. I've definitely
Yeah,
gotten introverted sometimes, but I've also gotten extroverted. And
gotten
I don't
extroverted.
actually think I'm extroverted. I don't think I am.
Yeah. Do you kind of like recharge through kind of quiet alone time versus like socializing?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, I would say
Yeah,
that this
everybody's
whole,
kind of somewhere
right.
in between.
I would say that this whole, we've been in lockdown for months now. I have been not hating this to the extent that makes me think I can't be an extrovert.
Sure. Right.
So,
I would like to know, I want to kind of pick at the making space for people. And I want to ask a couple questions there. First, I'd love to know, like, how does one go about creating that space? And
yeah.
then as kind of a follow-up question, I would love to know kind of the typical challenges you have faced in kind of making that need or requirement for your team known and kind of advocating for that.
Yes. So part of it is that, and I remember you talking about this back in the day.
Yeah.
There are so many.
We can say back when I was with Best Buy.
Okay,
that's fine. They're not a sponsor, but
but people know.
Yes, absolutely. That's so. In case anybody doesn't know, Sarah and I actually met. She was a vendor that I worked with at Best Buy, and then when I realized what she and her team were all about, it's like, oh boy, this relationship is going to transcend the walls of Best Buy at some point. So
yes, so we've kept in touch. So
all right, yes. So go ahead.
So when you were at Best Buy and you had a team similar to mine that was made up of very different skill sets, and I remember you talking about, everybody is strong in different areas. So some people are really strong in one lane. Some people are strong in two. There are the rare people that can actually span all of them.
Right.
So I definitely have that same set of people and different skills on my team. And you were asking about what the challenges I face making space for them.
How do you make space? Because I know that I mean, at least in my experience, advocating for the space a team like that needs, you ruffle your fair share of feathers and you meet up against some resistance. So I'd love to know kind of like your stories from the trenches.
So I think we do work quite differently than the rest of the business, and that collaboration that I was talking about several times now. I would say for the rest of the business, we're able to collaborate in a way that others would think of as a luxury. I think others are working on, like, our team has the luxury of working on a much smaller set of engagements and go really deep. So that often is something that I do have to really make pretty clear guardrails around and push for, because and I understand, from an operational perspective, when people are looking across the business and seeing how many things people are working on and trying to spread the work around evenly, it appears that our team is doing less in that way. And I'm using air quotes for people who aren't watching the video. We're not actually doing less. We're delivering a different type of work, and it just requires a different type of thinking, or different, I guess, a different depth that you have to go into the thinking.
Right.
Yep. So I think from the operational side of things, there's always sort of a push I have to make there.
Yeah.
We also, another thing that I really encourage the team to make time for, and this, if you work on the agency side of things, you track your time, and there's a certain amount of billability that you want to maintain, which is really important for lots of reasons, not only actual financial performance of the company, but also making a case for when you need to hire someone, or making a case for when someone might be ready for, when someone might need to offload some of their work. So there's lots of reasons why that's really important, and you want to essentially be as billable as you can. But I think that can be at the sacrifice of making space for feeding your curiosity. And I really want everyone to be able to feel like they have the time to, maybe you love this specific blog that talks about, cutting edge UX experiences, or maybe you're really interested in learning about jobs to be done and want to take a course on that. I wanted people on my team to have time and space for that. And they do. I think, while I've been able to make that case internally, and that's all happening, I think then it becomes a matter of making sure that people can feel comfortable taking that time and not like they should be working on something else.
Right, exactly. It's one thing as a leader to say, okay, feel free to take this time. But if the larger culture around them is saying, no, I'm running around. So like if you have somebody over here saying, I'm running around like a chicken with their head cut off, why does it seem like you're not? That's not fair.
Right. Well, and especially now, all businesses have been in some stage of change and flex over the past couple of months. And I think the message across the board at our company has been, we're all leaning in, like we're all going to be doing things maybe that aren't our typical role. Like we're all sort of in this together.
Right.
And our team certainly has been as well. But I think that has been especially a time where staying true to what we need to do the work well, has become really important, because it could be easy to just say like, forget that. Now you're going to be filling all your extra time with, whatever the long list of needs are that ultimately aren't as important.
Yeah, that's always a risk when you're kind of trying to respond to a crisis, that doesn't become kind of the status quo or the modus operandum or whatever other Latin terms I can think of.
Yeah, I was recently in a talk and someone said, short term will always kill long term. And I was like, yes, that is really, like, it's a good thing. Like, it's a good scary thing to have written down somewhere. So you're like, don't let this happen.
Right. Yeah. It's really, really tough. And that's just true of humans. Yeah. We, my wife is in prevention science, and it is really hard, especially in a crisis, to convince whatever powers that be to invest in understanding more of that, of that stuff. The next thing I want to kind of follow up on is this idea of when you were talking about managing versus leading. I love this idea of or maybe this was before then. Anyway, when you were talking about having different people on your team with different skill sets, and then trying to craft situations where those complementary skill sets kind of come together and complement each other, so that you can achieve a better outcome. I'm totally on board with that, but I've had experiences where those same two people who have these like amazingly like the best complementary skill sets and the best complementary experiences and the best complementary perspectives, their personalities are not complementary. And I'm wondering if you've had any kind of experience with that and what you've done.
Yeah, it's a good question. I definitely have. So I would say our team is not huge. There's maybe 15 of us. And I think one of the ways we have been so successful is we're a little intense. And I don't think we have definitely a lot of different personality types on the team.
Sure.
But I think in the process, like, going through any interview process, culture fit is always a big part of it. I feel like an interviewee would very quickly be like, this is not the job for me. After speaking to a few of us, if there was really going to be like any serious personality clashes.
Right.
I think they would quickly be able to identify, like, I'm not going to like hanging out with these people. Right.
I'm not super successful.
So I think there's some self-selection that goes into the group. That being said, that's my dog.
Yes.
That being said, there are people who just like working better together. Right. And I have actually struggled with this a lot recently, even where I'm finding that team is often as big of a motivator, if not the motivator, more so than the actual type of project you're working on or the industry. And that's something that I've been thinking a lot about recently, as well as this other, I kind of almost started talking about this before, but when you have people that are like specialized in one area, that's great. And I want to continue to develop that skill and, sort of like feed that expertise. But at the same time, I also don't want a team of 15 people who all do something entirely different and can't do the other things. So there's also a balance between expertise deep in one area and then having more generalized skills that is also really hard to get right.
Right.
I don't think I have the answer, to be honest.
Right. No. Yeah.
I think what we've been experiencing is just trying our best, and also a little bit of like, sometimes we aren't able to put you on the exact right project or team, and sometimes you just have to get through it. You still got to.
This is why we pay you.
Exactly. It's a job at the end of the day.
All of these uncomfortable truths that we don't like to talk about.
I know. And I think that's so true on teams like ours, I would imagine like yours too, where we are really like, we spend a lot of time together. We are very close. We're friends. And it does sometimes, you need sort of a reminder at the end of the day. Sometimes you're like, actually, this is a business. Sometimes we need to remind ourselves that it is.
Yeah. I'm sorry. This is tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, it's really funny. I actually get asked a lot like, oh, well, what if you work for a company that just, even though you like show them that, this is good and, thinking this way is better, they still won't do it. It's like, well, then you have to make a decision, like, is it, and really the fork in the road is as simple, but not easy as simple as, do I keep going and fighting and and persisting, or is it time to change tracks? And I think just hearing you talk about this, sometimes stuff just kind of sucks.
Yeah. I think well, as far as I know, anyway, I think everyone on the team gets at least enough of what motivates them and feeds their creativity that they're staying. And I think that's why people stay. But there is always some of that.
Yep.
It's not always the, I feel like we do a really good job of talking about how our team and the work we're doing is like really exciting and, the future of the business and really impacting our clients' bottom lines. And it sounds like sexy and exciting and cool. And it is, but
because it is,
there's also, it's great. But there's also projects that are less fun.
Yeah.
It happens.
It's still work.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's still difficult.
Right.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that a lot. So if you were, let's say you were approached by someone who has found themselves in a leadership position, like it's their first time being in a leadership position, or someone who feels like that's maybe where their professional trajectory is headed, or they'd like it to head, what sort of advice would you give them, either on preparing for doing this kind of thing, or like starting out? Like what are some things that you've learned that you wish you would have known? Yeah.
And I think I have a lot of thoughts on this because I feel like everyone on my team are future leaders. They're all superstars. So I tell them these things all the time. So I think one part of it is really leaning into figure out what your superpower is and lean into that. Like before, when I was saying I'm not the visionary leader, if I was trying to show up that way, I would feel insincere and weird to people around me. I think you need to show up as a leader the way you lead, with what your strengths are, essentially. So that I think is really important. I also think that no matter what type of leader you are, humility is really important. No one wants to work on a team with somebody who is uninterested in others' opinions, doesn't want to consider another point of view, or is like dictatorial. I think the highest performing teams are ones where the structure is relatively flat and the focus isn't really on hierarchy, but more on just working together to get the job done. I really feel like too much hierarchy creates both this sometimes like misplace motivation to like always get to the next level, which is natural when you put that many levels in front of someone.
Yeah.
I think like the fewer steps people feel like they have to take, the more everyone's going to just all the time show up in a way that they're focused on doing the best job they can. So I actually feel like maybe in some ways it's more motivating, which might be counterintuitive.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's really important. And then the other thing that's really important with this type of team, again, where you have all those different skill sets, is learning how to adapt your leadership style. Or maybe this is more about leadership, yes, but I think also specifically when you have direct reports, it's really important to not just show up the same way to all of those conversations. Like some direct reports are going to respond very positively to a leader or a manager who comes in and says, I want you to tell me what your career development plan is, and I'll help you make it happen. Some direct reports are going to be like, great, this is awesome. I can build out this plan. This person will support me. They'll push me. Others are going to be like, I don't know. And that type of question is going to make them feel insecure and on the spot. And they need much more guidance. That's just one example. I mean,
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of tuning we need to do.
I love. I've even gotten. I mean, given that specific example, I was in a situation where that's kind of how the company I was working for was moving toward, like, more employee driven kind of things. And like for me, I'm one of those employees that's like, yeah, let me drive it, because who else knows what I want better than. But then some of the folks on my team are like, so then what do we need you for? Like, if you're not going to help us with, and they actually viewed it as, you're not going to help us with this, and it's like, that's such a fascinating perspective. Like I never thought about that. And that's perfectly valid. Let's talk about that.
I feel like I made the same mistake. I have my approach, similar to yours, has always been like, I want to plan it. I want to figure it out myself and create the path to that future role that I think I should have. So I've always asked my direct reports that, and some of them haven't had immediate answers. Some of them had. And then there was one who was like, in retrospect, I never should have asked that question. It definitely put her in a place of thinking like, well, what is my job here even? And like, do I have a development plan? And I obviously was not my intention, but it was just a good learning that it's like, you can't ask the same question the same way to everyone. Some people aren't going to respond the way you think.
Right. Exactly. Super, super fascinating. Okay. So what, let's see here. What, when you were thinking about kind of coming to this session, and I kind of gave you that the brief outline of what we were going to be talking about, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you were like, I really was hoping that we would address this, or I really want to make sure that I say this or talk about this?
One of the things that is on my mind lately, because we've been dealing with this as a team, is so my team is called Customer Strategy and Experience, which is a very broad blanket of things. That means we're doing innovation programs. That means we're doing experience design, branding, like really a lot falls into that overall umbrella. But one thing that's really interesting that I'm still formulating a point of view on myself, and I'd just be interested to talk about, is the difference or the lack of difference really between traditional research and then UX research. So we've always had a separate part. Some people within my team are the UX team, and we've been trying to grow that practice. And the more and more that we're getting into it, the more we're sort of coming to this conclusion that like, it's like UX research is research. It's the same thing. And there are maybe some specific methods and maybe some specific facilitation techniques, but I don't know if it's actually any more different than just like the difference between facilitating an interview versus facilitating an ideation session. Like, I think it's just, these are other tools in our toolkit. And it's interesting, and this is maybe obvious to many people, but it's interesting to me because we've drawn a pretty clear line there for so long as a business. And now that we're digging into it, we're like, why is this line here?
Yeah.
Why have we not been integrating this more holistically all along?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
that's something we've been working through.
That's interesting. Yeah. I guess my first thoughts in response to that are I feel like I believe two things that are in constant conflict with each other. Words matter and they don't.
That's a pretty central conflict. Yes.
Right. So on the days that words matter, or when I'm believing that philosophy, I'm like, no, we need to be very specific and call what we're doing. My favorite term is design research.
Mm-hmm.
And so on the days where words matter, my response would be, yes, there is a difference, because yes, research as a whole body of things that you do to learn stuff. Yes, that is the umbrella term of research. When we start qualifying it, I think it's because of what we're trying to learn, or kind of the problem space that we're working in.
Mm-hmm.
So on the days when words matter, I love the term design research because it better than other terms, it helps to communicate why we're doing the research. It's research specifically done to inform design decisions or experience decisions. Whereas marketing research or market research is not the same thing, even though design research and market research, if you were to do a Venn diagram, there would be quite a bit of overlap. On the days that words don't matter, I'm like, it's all just research. We're just going to go learn. We're going to go learn some stuff, and we have some objectives. So yeah.
That's interesting. I actually know exactly what you mean. And it really is just like, for better, I don't know if this is a good thing, but it's like, what narrative suits the story I'm trying to tell?
Right. Exactly. Like, who's the audience and what's going to help them understand better?
Mm-hmm. And I think the way I'm starting to think about it is like on a grid. So if you think about, or a graph, so if you think about like, maybe the horizontal axis is what you're talking about with like the different type of research. So if on one end, it's like, market research all the way through like design research, that continuum. And then maybe vertically we have like, I think the problem with UX is that user experience is just so broad as a term. Yeah. Maybe it's more like everything's user experience when you think about it most broadly.
Right.
But if we think about it from like digital through physical perhaps, and then everything just falls on the spectrum somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
And there are so many other ways to slice that. So like, it's like, yeah, those are definitely two axes that you can, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm playing with a rubber band.
Oh, nice. I have a little brain squeeze stress ball thing.
How many times have you squozen the stress ball during this conversation?
Yeah, today. It's usually those, like I was saying earlier, it's usually those management meetings where I have to talk about resources that this comes out.
Oh, dude. Yeah. Yep. I'm so with you. Okay. So, what were we just talking about?
The spectrum of
digital,
the
spectrum.
So
There's like a bunch of different axes that we could use. So yes, definitely like market versus design. Then you have like physical versus digital experiences. Then you could be like talking about the different research methods, like primary versus secondary, and formal versus informal, and so there's like so many ways to kind of slice and dice the data, and it's when my brain starts to do that, that's what pushes me over the fence into the words don't matter.
Right. I think it probably
that's just research, guys. We're just trying to learn some stuff.
Right. I think it does come back to audience, because you might have someone who's going to want to someone maybe who's more familiar with this world and wants to know the nitty gritty, or someone who really wants to see deep experience in one area. Or you might have someone who's really like, they're interested in the output and they don't care what the hell you do to get there.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I think, so like this particular conversation, as well as some other stuff that you said earlier about kind of working differently with different people. Like, I think there is a, I think there's a definitely a theme of when you're in a position of influence or leadership, one of the things you have to be able to do is adapt your message and even your style,
Mhm.
because what works, just like within your team, what works with one doesn't work with another. The same thing is true of what works with an executive versus a frontline store employee. Very different, and it's not because one's better or worse. It's just
Right.
their
Different
their world.
motivations,
Yeah,
different
exactly.
priorities. Yeah.
Different, yeah, different accountabilities.
Hmm.
So yeah, interesting. Well, I this has been super fun to connect
I
with
had
you.
fun too. I
Yeah.
love getting to catch up with you, and
Yeah.
I always think it's funny that in this podcast setting or like interview setting, I always am like, oh, I guess I'll share what I think. I don't know how. I don't know if anyone's going to find this valuable, but
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's like what we talk about, and so much of what you said answers questions that I get on the regular, and so I think, just like we were just talking about, for some people the best way to learn is to go through a course. For other people, the better way to learn is to listen to two folks have a conversation about it and kind of riff on it in kind of an informal, way, with all of our dogs barking and rubber bands flipping and stress ball squeezing.
exactly.
So yeah. So I yeah, for at least for me, if nothing else, this has been super fun and really valuable.
Yes.
It's helped me to remember some really important things.
Yeah, it was really nice to chat. Hopefully it was helpful for others.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's like, this is super fun for us. Anybody else who benefits, that's gravy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Go XDGO. A special thanks to our guest, Sarah Timmings, for joining me today. Our next podcast will continue our focus on design leadership and will feature Ling Li, Director of User Experience at TravelNet Solutions. Until then, please like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. To learn more about XDGO and how we can help you, your team, or your organization build and strengthen your experience design capabilities, please visit us at www.xdgo.io.